Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It's really a pleasure. I don't know if this is just a new contraption for us. It's really a pleasure to provide a space for this Chavurah, and it's wonderful to see such a great blend of various community members, and it's been a lovely service. Yasher koach to everyone who has led so far. I'd like to just start by sharing a nigun that I hope we can sing together, and then share a little bit about this week's parasha. So the nigun goes like this. Yadadai, 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 dadadai, yadadai, yadadai. You can try that. Yadadai, 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 dadadai, yadadai, yadadai. Lovely. So this week's parsha, Chaye Sarah, those words of course mean Sarah's life. Begins, the part we didn't read that part, but it begins with the description, of course, of Sarah's death. The whole parsha starts with her death in chapter 23 of Bereshit. And in chapter 22 of Bereshit, last week's parsha, is the narrative of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac that we read on Rosh Hashanah. And the juxtaposition of these two narratives, you may be familiar with this rabbinic interpretation, the juxtaposition of the binding of Isaac and the near sacrifice of Isaac with Sarah, his mother's death, is understood in the Midrash to express a causal relationship between the two, that the binding of Isaac caused Sarah's death. In his comment on the very beginning of this week's parsha, 11th century Rabbi Rashi explains, the death of Sarah is narrated directly after the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, because as a result of the tidings of the Akedah, that her son had been fated for slaughter and had been all but slaughtered, her soul flew away and she died. The Midrashim that describe this idea come from as early as the 6th and 7th century from our tradition, and the sages of that time, their understanding of the pain and the trauma of this powerful narrative resulted in them composing midrashim like this. These midrashim, you may be familiar with them, I'm not sure, but they often involve Hasatan, which is not the Jewish version of the devil, but it's the source of the same name, Satan. So this character appears Hasatan a couple times in the Torah and a couple times in the Tanakh, is the adversarial angel who takes pleasure, it seems, in coaxing his victims to disobey God and also to disobey their best intentions. And actually sometimes, for example, in the book of Job, Hasatan even taunts and coaxes God to do something that God doesn't even want to do. The legends, these midrashim, have Hasatan approaching Sarah and telling her about what Abraham has done on the mountain, leaving out, in most of the midrashim, leaving out the important detail that God commanded Abraham to do this, and telling her Hasatan's interpretation of the truth, which is that had the angel not stopped Abraham, Isaac would have been sacrificed. And the spin that Hasatan puts on this story, that Abraham did this of his own free will, that he fully intended to complete the act, that he had no compassion for his son, is as awful to her as the truth, which also appears in one of these midrashim, which is that God compelled Abraham to do this terrible thing, that he did take actions to complete it, and that he did not tell Isaac what was happening. Both of these things are so awful for Sarah that in the end of all of these midrashim, she dies. At the end of each midrash, Isaac is described as being all but sacrificed because of the horrible, horrific pain of what has happened. And this reality pierces Sarah's being. It's even told that her wails of misery, whether of Hasatan's spiteful prodding of her or of the reality of what has happened within her family, this misery, these wails that she expresses are the source of our tekiah, the sources of our shofar wailing on Rosh Hashanah. A mother's voice as she is confronted with the pain of the world, the lies of it, and the truth of it, embody an entire people's protest that the world is not as it should be. This is all based on these midrashim from this week and last week. This story, including Sarah's tortured reaction, has been a major theme in Israeli poetry for generations. There is an incredible array of poems about this topic. In 2001, I had plans as a junior in college to study at Hebrew University for the semester because of the violence and the bombings of the Second Intifada. That was impossible. And instead, I went to London that semester, and I studied in the Department of Jewish and Israel Studies at UCL, where I spent an entire semester with these poems. It was the most fascinating class I maybe ever took in college, with Rachel Korazim, whose her claim, is that this Akedah narrative and all the players in it were an important lens through which to view Israeli society and psychology. This was her claim 20 years ago, perhaps even more so now. And these are some of the questions that she prodded us to ask. Who are the parents who are compelled to sacrifice their children? And will they do it? And if they do it, is that heroic or is that an abomination? Huge question. Who are the bound children who are swept into a narrative they did not write, they did not choose? Who are the rams, the actual sacrifices, and what is our responsibility to them? Who are the interceders, the angels, the malachim, who suggest another way, and do they arrive in time? Our people have used this story over and over again to describe the pressures, the stakes of living as Jews in the world, bound by a covenant to God, a covenant to each other, and a covenant to all humanity. Israeli poet Chaim Gori wrote in his most famous poem, Shura, Heritage, from 1960, Avelat hasha'ah hahi horish l'tze'etzav, hem noladim uma'achelet b'libam, which means Isaac bequeathed this hour to his offspring. They are born with the knife of the Akedah in their hearts. In this time of travesty, perhaps this story is a useful lens for us as well, to describe ourselves and to describe others around us and to find compassion and empathy for the many roles we are all forced to play in the narrative that we are living, that we did not choose. Whether it is grappling with the horrors that befell our people on October 7th, or taking in and responding to the war that is ongoing, or orienting ourselves to the level of overt anti-Semitism that surrounds us. Let us do what our ancestors have done with this story, with the gift of this Yerusha, this inheritance of ours. How are we, Avraham, compelled to perform and support acts we could never have imagined? How are we, Isaac, bound up with no idea how we were placed upon this altar? How are we the malach, the angel, the interceder, who coaxes the binder, whoever that is, back to their senses and reminds them of their deeply held commitments? How are we the ram, the unwitting sacrifice because we are in the wrong place at the wrong time? How are we Hasatan, the adversary, baiting others with information in its most extreme form, with no intention of emotionally caring for them as we do it? How are we Hagar from last week's parasha, weeping and afraid to even look at the misery experienced by those we love? And how are we Sarah, heartbroken, alone, crying out from the misery of the magnitude of the lies and the horror of the truth? What we do know, as we ask those questions about Sarah and Hagar in particular, since this is Chaye Sarah week, is that they both have sons who had traumatic childhoods, whom they tried to save, and that somehow they raised sons who were able to do what it tells of in this week's parsha as well. Vayikbaru oto Yitzchak v'Yishmael banav el ma'ara hamachpelah. Isaac and Ishmael, Abraham's sons, came together to bury him at Machpelah. The wails of the mothers, who are the inspiration for our wordless prayer of Tekiah, speak to this moment. No clear solutions do they offer, but they do create a space for connection and empathy, so critical now. Among the hostages in Gaza is a 74-year-old Jewish woman named Vivian Silver, a co-founder of an organization, Women Wage Peace, which centers the voices of women, especially mothers, in searching for a shared future in a shared land. And their anthem goes like this. From the north to the south, from the west to the east, hear the prayer of the mothers. Bring them peace, bring them peace. Mata yimsu chomot hapachad. When will the walls of fear melt away? V'shavti migaluti, and I will return from my exile. Yipachu sharai, and my gates will open. El hatov ha'amiti, to what is truly good. Yadadai, 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 from the north to the south, from the west to the east, hear the prayer of the mothers, bring them peace, bring them peace, bring them peace. Shabbat Shalom.